Hi friends, Eric again here with another video where I talk about all the cool and exciting things that I'm doing, like each and every week for as long as I'm doing these videos, which who knows how long these will keep going, and how long this one's gonna be. I don't know. Anyway, so what did I do this week? On Virtuous Heaven front, I did publish the Steam Cloud support into like the public facing stuff because I think I figured out a way to make sure that the game just doesn't override your save file and does at least like some kind of like cursory checks to make sure that it like only takes a save file and overwrites it when like the cloud save is like further along the line of progress. Hopefully. But so far I haven't heard any complaints, which is cool, but who knows? With games that have comparatively low numbers of players and sales, sometimes it takes a bit for bugs to appear. So if you, like I said it in the announcement post and elsewhere, but if you play Virtuous Heaven, first of all, if you enjoy your time, write a positive review on Steam. That would be cool. And aside from that, if you run into Steam Cloud bugs or any other kinds of bugs, please let me know. I cannot fix bugs that I'm not aware of. And yeah, but aside from that, it's cool and seems to be all to be moderately stable, which is a relief because I said this elsewhere, but one big problem I have very often with publishing anything to Steam isn't as much also like stuff that is tied to Steam as like a platform, for example, Steam Cloud support, but also achievements and other things. It's not that it's overly difficult. It takes a little bit to wrap my head around because I'm just not used to this kind of work, but it's fine. My main problem is that I'm slightly scared of pushing like updates that might break things on that platform because, well, there are people in that community that are just don't have a very measured response to things not working. Let's put it this way. Nothing bad has happened, but it's just like something that is like a source of anxiety, and it's something that I really don't like. But hey, it's Steam. Sometimes you just have to deal with things, I guess. Anyway, let's talk a bit more about exciting things. It's really incredible how what I'm still calling JRPG game, because I don't want to think about names and a lot other things, because right now I just enjoy building this thing from like building a foundation for it and just seeing it slowly come together. But yeah, still working on JRPG. It's very exciting, for me at least. And so this week, it's a bit difficult for me to talk about things because as I was setting up this ramshackle presentation, I noticed how I kind of forgot how I started this week, on what I did early this week and what I did late last week. So who knows? Maybe I'm repeating myself here, but so I kind of like I finished building basically building the basic systems of everything, like how status effects work or like are supposed to be handled, how like the whole damage system works, how items are supposed to work, and all that kind of stuff. And then I found myself on either Monday or Tuesday suddenly thinking, oh, I kind of have to build like a playable thing now. This is like, I think, what should be next, just to see how it works there. Because sure, you can build your cool system and have it like do attacks and like damage and whatever else, but like an RPG is not just one encounter and it's over. It's a series of encounters. There's like resources that get exchanged. There's like a whole different layer of like math that is happening. And we're not even talking about narrative here right now. Just the simple act of like moving through an RPG as like a series of like spreadsheet fights, where like things like values change and you have to see like that things change in the way that you want them to change. So that's and that's kind of like where I am right now, where I feel like I have to like go next is, or like what I want to do next is build something playable. That it doesn't have to be big. In fact, I don't want it to be big. I don't want it to be complicated. So like my idea is basically build a dungeon. Build something where you like start and then you go through, fight like a specific set of encounters. There's some optional stuff that is planned to be there, and then there's like a larger fight that is more challenging at the end, and then you have like a neat small package of stuff that shouldn't take longer than, I don't know, 30 to 45 minutes to play, and then just see how well all of these cool ideas that I have and that I built are actually working when you're deploying them in succession and like trying to build challenges around them, and that's always the big problem, give all of this stuff in the hands of other people and see how they feel about it all. And that's still very far away, but I'm starting to build the whole thing and like been thinking about like, okay, what does this need? Basically there are like two branches to this. One is the narrative framing, which I'm not talking about at all in these videos, because especially narrative is something that I want to keep for myself for as long as I can, because very often I have this when I'm like I have this from like when I used to write stories, mostly for myself, but still. And something that always caused problems is when I started talking about these while I was still writing them, which kind of like used to destroy them. So I really do not want to talk about narrative framing and what I think and what I want this to be, aside from like, yeah, it's kind of like inspired by X, Y, and Z at some point, but like not now. Also, like I think I vaguely mentioned it like in the video 2 weeks ago or something, or 3 weeks ago at some point. So I'm not really talking about that. It does exist. It also like I also have nice ideas how I can use the battle system and the way it's structured to reflect the narrative framing and the actual story and the world that it's gonna be about. So that's cool and exciting. And so there is like a connection there. But still, I'm not really like worried about that right now, because in general, again, the goal for this playable thing overall is to see that the numbers are working, to see that the systems are working, to see that people find interacting with these systems interesting and engaging, and can get something out of this and can like basically find the narrative and find the excitement through the systems. So I'm not really thinking all that much about those things, even though like every time I go on a walk, I think about them. So I do think sort of much about them, but like not when I'm at home working, and then get ideas and get like awfully excited, which I then have to kind of like put to the side and also like be okay with, you know, them maybe never coming into being, because well, who knows when these things, like for example, yesterday I had a good idea for like how should this ever become like a bigger game, how it would end, which who knows really, like who knows if this ever happens. But like it was a cool thing to think about while I was outside just like walking around. It was like, this would be so cool, and then you could do that, and like, and you could like end it with this phrase, and it's all exciting, but also very ephemeral. So whatever, who knows? What's more real is encounters, and how many encounters you have to fight, and how these encounters are supposed to work, and what happens there. So that's what I've like spent most of my time on. And the big thing I did at first was if I can remember, I'm gonna put it in the video description. Back when I think in 2023 or 2022, I forgot when Dungeon Encounters actually came out. Square Enix did an interview with the director of the game, whose name I've forgotten, but who's also responsible for like the combat design in almost every Final Fantasy until Final Fantasy 12 at least, and other things. And it's a really interesting interview. And like, I mean, he goes into detail about like how the ATB system came into being, and like detailing, especially about dungeon encounters, how like some of the like strangely looking and seeming systems, like what the intentions behind these are. And it's like, for me, it's really interesting to see how it works, and like the kind of like the sentiment behind it all, like to see that, which is just, again, I find this always interesting to see that, like, how these people approach these games. But somewhere towards the end of the interview, there was a question, I don't even know how it came into being, but he was talking about how he built the original Final Fantasy with a specific number of encounters in mind, because that number of encounters would take around 13 hours to go through, or like would lead to the game taking around like 10 to 15 hours to complete, which was about as much, maybe probably not, but like he said, oh, this is something that you could do like in a day of debugging. So like you would sit down and play through the entire game in a day to see how it goes, and this was like kind of like his idea for like how many encounters the game should take. And basically, in a way, all the numbers, and naturally, if you say, I think it was like 500 encounters. If you say, okay, we intend players to fight roughly 500 encounters from start to finish. You can kind of track and like balance the game around like a specific expected level, because you kind of know, okay, like you get that amount of XP with each encounter, or like you get that many levels after, like get a level after a certain amount of encounters, and you can kind of like extrapolate from there the level of the players that they're gonna have, and you can kind of like build the rest of the game around these numbers that you like that you estimated, and then can start balancing everything. It's also interesting to think about him saying, oh, like basically Final Fantasy is built around players fighting 500 encounters. If you think about the game having random encounters, so there's also like on that end something built around, I assume, like an expected number of encounters per step, so that you roughly get to that point. Anyway, I do found this approach interesting because, well, having never built an RPG game or built a dungeon or anything, it's hard to get an idea of like, okay, how many encounters is a good number for this? And it's not only how many encounters, it's also how many different enemies are a good number for like a playable thing, and how are you spacing these out and all this kind of stuff, and how much space should this dungeon have, or like have the player, like do the players have to traverse to fight these encounters. So it was an interesting thing, and like after that I sat down and kind of like put on a timer and booted up Final Fantasy V, picked one like mid-game dungeon and walked through it without random encounters, and just like timed it just to see, okay, how long does it take just to walk from beginning to end of it. And then I did the same thing and counted the number of random encounters you would get in that time, and also like previously to that estimated, or like did a like measured how long it takes to just fight a random encounter. Obviously this stuff like sort of varies throughout the entire game, but like if you just like assume, okay, this game is built around a random encounter, like no matter where you take it, to take roughly the same amount of time, you can kind of like guess, okay, if like a random encounter takes like say a minute and you get 12 random encounters in that dungeon, you know, okay, it's gonna take at least 20 minutes to get through it. Like plus walking, plus being confused because you don't know the exact layout, and then maybe like getting more encounters and whatever else you might have. So I did that, and then I thought about, also looked at a spreadsheet for like Final Fantasy V encounter tables or like enemy types, and just like counted, okay, how many unique enemies are like per area or per dungeon, just to get an idea, okay, how many enemies would I have to make for this example thing, and then like a good number for like a mid-size or like a larger size dungeon. Like Final Fantasy V has like 3 different types basically. Like small dungeons have around 4 unique enemies, larger dungeons have 8, and then the very big dungeons have around 12 unique enemies. That's not 12 unique encounters, it's just like you have 12 enemies, and then the encounters are built as like out of combinations of these. So I've conceptualized 8 different enemies because I kind of like want to have something mid-sized. Realized yesterday that none of these 8 unique enemies are just like, oh, this thing is just gonna do physical attacks and nothing else. So I'm probably gonna have to do one additional one that's just like some normal guy, just to have like some filler thing, because the other ones are do some like weird shit. Yeah, but anyway, I've like made concepts for like these 8 unique enemies, what I wanted them to do, what kind of special abilities they would have, and then sat down and filled out my cool move spreadsheet that I built. And it was really nice to see how easy it was to get these partially fairly out there moves to work. Some took a little bit like fiddling around to like make sure that the game doesn't crash. And most crashes honestly happen because I misnamed something, and not as much that the script and the stuff that I've built that handles like how attacks are performed or moves are performed, like it couldn't handle what I wanted it to do. I did run into some fun problems and fun questions in that process. So one enemy is basically can switch around between 2 different states. And interestingly enough, that second part, second questions down there, is it possible to go into item that is attached to the same enemy? So this is an enemy that has 2 different states. One is being sort of like a dried out crystal, and the other one is a slime. And it has, like, the crystal has a move called Rehydrate, which turns it into a slime. And the slime has a move called Dehydrate, which turns it into a crystal. And that's, like, the first idea was like, oh, I can't just, like, make 2 different enemies or, like, can have the slime enemy and the crystal enemy be one enemy and have it switch between 2 different movesets and sprites. But that would kind of like go against the spirit of, oh, this move spreadsheet is completely open, and every move you pick out of it can be applied to everything that exists in a battle, because in that state, that dehydrate and rehydrate move wouldn't do anything to, like, if you were to attack a different enemy or whatever. So I had to build it in such a way that instead of like changing the state of one enemy, it creates an enemy. Like, basically, if an enemy right now is hit with a dehydrate attack, it turns into a crystal. And then the crystal has its moves, which can turn it into a slime, but it will never be able to basically turn back into its original state, because it has left that thing. But that's cool for enemies. But then I thought, okay, what happens if you do that to a player? Does the player character then turn into slime? And how, like, what does this mean? And like, how do I do this in a way that's interesting? I think. I mean, one way would be to, okay, the player character is dead, and now they're replaced with a player character slime. But what does that mean? And thankfully, the game doesn't really exist. I still haven't really dealt with it. I think right now there's just like, it works slightly different on player characters because I don't want the game to crash. Same goes for the flee move. Right now, when a player character uses the flee move, that is something that an enemy can do, the game crashes because it can't deal with that. I want to do something where it like actually works in some way or another, but fleeing also doesn't really work because there's no dungeon where you can, or like no overworld map where you can flee to or like escape to. It's just a battle screen and nothing. So obviously this part is still a bit of a work in progress, but like thinking about this, okay, how do you work with like transformation spells, but also then realizing, wait a second, if you have in this spreadsheet a move that can turn any enemy that is hit by it into a fairly benign and not dangerous one, that's kind of cool. But because what if imagine like a large RPG, and what if you find access to this like slime turning spell from a player character perspective, and you can turn that boss into a slime and make it completely harmless? That sounds fun. It's kind of like a similar thing to like how in Final Fantasy games you can turn bosses into frogs sometimes with the toad spell and stuff like that. It's kind of like in a similar vein. So I still have to think about again how this applies to the player. Maybe there is like a slime status effect or something. The other idea I had was like, what if this triggers something like, you know how in Elder Scrolls game when you get turned into a vampire and this opens up a completely whole new thing? What if this happens when you turn yourself into slimes? But I'm just one person, and even with all the resources in the world, I don't think that I would be able to do that. To like basically create a different game for the like, in case some like the players have the idea like, or find the means to turn themselves into slimes. Who knows? Thankfully, this doesn't have to. I don't have to really think about it, though it is theoretically possible in this thing that I've built to get access to the slime turning spell. It's a bit involved. There's like 3 steps I think involved, but it is possible. Because like that was another thing that I did. Is spreadsheet magic is possible. There's like one character has a very simple way of basically accessing different moves. It's a bit random, but it is working, and that was cool to see. That it's something I did today, and it was the last of the things that I did. Anyway, the other question that was here is like, is it possible to go, like, should it be possible to go into item depth, and what does that mean? And yeah, it will be possible because I thought it's funny. So there's a move like the crystal enemy has it's called a thieving crystal. I don't know what it is, but basically it steals items when it attacks you. And then I was thinking, okay, like what happens if your inventory is empty, or like if you have, because right now the way it's built is, so you build out your inventory with items, but when the number of a specific items in your inventory reaches 0, that entry isn't deleted from the sheet. You just cannot really access it anymore. So in that sense, if like then the thieving crystal would try to steal an item from your inventory and like get like an item with a count of 0, then is the question: does the move then fail? Or does it like basically create a like weird void in your backpack of -1 potions? I don't know what this is supposed to look like, but I do find the idea interesting that it kind of like creates this depth that you need to like later on have to balance out in order to get potions again or be able to get potions again. Which, and interestingly enough, that steal move was then also something that it was implemented in like a character move, where like, oh, that character takes a random item and uses it like for a party-wide heal. And then again, it's possible, like, you can still do that move even though your inventory is empty, but you will go into item debt with that. And so that's kind of like something I just find funny to have. It's a bit different. And like one reason why I was thinking about it is, again, dungeon encounters. And it's like a fairly famous thing in dungeon encounters is you can go into debt. There's a mouse that steals a lot of money from you. That's like the usual thing. What happens to people? There's a fairly famous Steam review that complains about it. And there are also tiles that just like steal money from you in that game. And this is how it's possible to like go into debt, like money debt. But since I'm not sure if this game that I have in mind for later will have a money system, having basically like a resource debt is the closest I can have. And again, I find it interesting on like a weirdly metaphysical level of like thinking, okay, like what could this mean? What could this mean to have -1 potions? Like, what does this express? Is this like a lack of resources that are needed to actually make the potion? Is this some kind of like social problem that like, oh, you let yourself get this thing stolen from you, you have to do something to make it up? Or is it just like a weird concept that isn't really explained because JRPGs are abstract? And this is just like something that's abstracted out and is expressed towards the player as -1 potions. Whatever people think this might be, then that's what it is for them. So yeah, it's possible right now at least to go into item debt. Who knows if I'll keep it that way, but it's one of those things I was just like thinking, why not? Why not have it like that? It also again opens up weird things and weird interactions for like also on the player side, how it could be used, for example, to do more with your inventory even though it's empty. However, you cannot use an item if it has 0 or less things in it. So you cannot go into item debt via using more potions. If your potions are at 0 or -1, you just cannot use them. However, they can still use as like an abstract, oh, you grab something out of your inventory. The other funny thing here is with stealing is that because enemies don't have an inventory, when a player uses the steal ability or the thing or like an attack that has like the steal flag in it, it will always steal from the player's inventory, which again I find funny because it kind of like create like flags or like frames the player inventory as a specific like entity of things that is accessed via this command, no matter who uses it. So that's just like something again. One thing that keeps coming into my mind and that really interests me with the way this is built is, and again, it's something I've talked about already, is how the way you build these systems, what these things express about the fabric of the world you're creating as well. So it's not just a game system. Obviously, it's a game system, but if you're like embedded in a world and have characters interact with them, and have characters address these things, it turns it from like just from a system that you've built into something that is sort of like metaphysically like embedded and connected to the world you're also creating. And in a way, it's always the case when you're making a game. Like the rules of the game are like the metaphysical like foundation of like the world, the characters you're making, or like the world the game is taking place in is like built around. But having it in such a way that this interaction and this connection is like much more open and much more accessible is just interesting to me. And I mean, this whole move spreadsheet is kind of like built around that idea, right? Is that like, oh, everything is like part of this connection in the world, and if you know how, you can access it through different means in some way or another, and play around with that. And like the world itself does not care if like that one move is accessed via like the slime enemy or via a player or via something completely different. It's yeah. So so that's like, again, I think I will keep running into these weird things because, and this is, I've only built 8 enemies right now, and I've already like run into like some like weird like systemic interactions between things that also like extends to status effects and specific moves that enemies have access to that the players don't have access to, but that would be pretty powerful if the players had access to those, and that could like, where you could like really change the way a battle would work, if you can do that, and at the same time the player characters have similar abilities in that work slightly differently, or like that do slightly different things. And so there's like a lot of like weird interactions that are already possible and are already like on my end visible, and where I'm thinking about, oh, how can I use this for like to create interesting encounters and especially interesting boss fights around these, because in the boss fights these parts will probably be much more important than in regular encounters, but because they're supposed to be more difficult and supposed to be more built around like the really the principles of the battle systems and the things you're building. But yeah, that's kind of like stuff that I built, and yeah, then I built, after I did the enemies, which I finished yesterday, and today I just built the entire like special move system for the players, which was incredibly easy because I just had to basically copy and slightly rewrite the system that determines what stuff is in your inventory, which then creates a quote-unquote like move inventory for each player character, with the associated resource that you have to spend to like perform these moves. And then it was just seeing, okay, which numbers do I have to adjust? What do I have to like build? Like what new status effects do I have to build? There were like 2 things that were like slightly tricky. One was an attack that also hurt the character that was performing it. That was a bit tricky because the way I built it first was killing the character. I basically had to like put the part where like the character gets hurt in a different place, and then it was working. The other one was making sure that like a move that a different character was able to do was triggered basically something where like the enemy was then forced to attack at that specific character. That was like another larger problem because it was slightly out of what I did until then, but the rest was like fairly easy. Even the spreadsheet magic was pretty easy because it was just about all I had to access was basic or like transfer was the name of the move that the character, basically the move that I've built is the character will remember what hit them and will perform the move that they got last attacked with. So, and that also works for player moves. So a player character could attack that other player character with a move, who would then be able to perform that as well. With the difference being that that character would always perform that move as a quote-unquote magic attack, which can be a bad idea, again, depending on enemy types and whatever else is there, but can also be incredibly powerful because it then uses, for example, it could use a physical attack with their magic attribute and all that kind of stuff, which they are much more powerful in. So it's and also thinking about these parts, thinking about, okay, how do I like have to frame the character and like have to frame how they access, for example, their spells, and that kind of stuff was interesting and was tricky, but it was fun as well. Like having it like that, and then basically performing an attack from a different player character on that other one, and then seeing that attack character being able to do something that they weren't supposed to have access to, and it was just working, was cool. So yeah, had a good time with it. This is all like basically everything is in place. Like every move is in place, every character is in place. I can build an inventory that characters can use. This stuff is persistent between encounters already, which is nice. I have every move for like all the enemy types that I want to make. The enemies don't exist quite yet because I was basically using a test enemy and just like seeing how it works. So next things first are kind of like building these enemies in some kind of like example fashion out, and then trying to figure out, okay, what do these character stats in numbers actually have to look like to make it interesting? Because right now it's very basically right now defense is incredibly strong because the like values are a bit unbalanced, and I have to think about how I want this all to look like. All kind of like build around the idea of like, okay, I want a random encounter to not take more than 3 turns, roughly speaking, just to make sure that like things move along quite nicely, and not like, and people are not bogged down in like long fights against like enemies that aren't really all that strong, that just take a while to get through their HP or something. And also like I don't want these basic encounters to be that like I don't want people to be required to like do a lot of like planning on their moves and like how they like have to like switch enemy defenses around to like really be able to attack them. That's stuff for boss fights, and not as much about regular encounters. I still want there to be like some fun with it in there, and like some encounters in there that are a bit more tricky, but like not all of them. So that's basically the next thing, like figuring out how to like properly do the numbers. More or less, I'll at least have a good starting point for the numbers, and then see how they develop. And then my next idea is like for like the test dungeon is to basically build a long corridor where like you have to fight the number of encounters I have in mind in order, and just to see, okay, how often do the characters die? How many resources does it take to get through? How long does it take to fight through these fights in a row? Like just like the raw numbers of the fights and the raw time of the fights. I really want to avoid building an entire dungeon out at this point. Basically the spatial arrangement of the encounters and where you like what you walk through and how the environment looks is, for me right now, is the last thing that I'm gonna worry about. Same goes for how the enemies are gonna look like and how the attacks are gonna look like. That's stuff that is so far down on the priority list, because, and it's a bit of a weird one for me, because with my action games I very often, like what I did first, and like in some parts it was necessary, like a lot of the visual work was like much earlier in that entire process, and that was like had to do with both like because I needed to like see how the combat felt, and also because, well, having an enemy in an action game be a red square that just moves around makes it very hard to understand how difficult it is to fight, and also makes coding the behavior more tricky, because of well, if you want to tie something to an animation, how are you going to do that if there's no animation? It is possible, like towards the end of Witcher 7 I figured out a nice way of doing it, but it took a while, and it's still not ideal, because it, for me with action games, it's very often like not very exciting then, and then it skews my perception of like how well everything is working. Whereas with this kind of stuff, where it's like very much just about the actions you perform and how like how quickly, like how quick everything moves, and how like the types of actions that you're doing, how it's framed and all that kind of stuff, makes it much less of a like big deal if like for a while it's just like a bunch of squares and placeholder art. Because I know, well, if I like, I already have a particle system for these attacks. I just have to like put a different particle effect in there and like draw it, and it will look different. Instead of like being just a red square that appears above an enemy and then produces a damage number. So yeah, it's all really exciting. It's honestly, it's great. It's hard for me to describe how much fun I'm having right now with all of this, because it's been so long since I've had this opportunity to just create a foundation of something for myself, and not be worried about, oh god, how long it's gonna take to make this game, and like when am I going to announce it, like, and like whatever else like weird like game development, project management, and the commercial shit like you would have to do. So just being able to like build this system and like starting to see, oh, I could do it like this, and like these interactions could be in there, and like what if you could do that, and then seeing like also like these first steps of like the bigger picture of what I have in mind, to see it working and to actually be possible, is really cool to see. And then occasionally I think about like how I want to deploy this in a larger narrative and get excited about that. And yeah, so it's very cool. I hope I can keep going with that, because I think again, it's just I think it's cool. And I hope I have something at some point that people can play, and where I can see if it's actually cool for other people as well, or just for me. But as always, if it's only cool for me, that's very often enough reason for me to make anything, because, well, at least I'm having fun. No, so yeah, awesome. We'll see where I am next week. Who knows? Maybe I have this test corridor working. That would be fun. And maybe I have like an idea of what to do when like players turn themselves into slimes. Or crystals, I guess. That's also possible. But crystals are more boring. Anyway. Yeah. See you around. See you next week. And goodbye.